Well, it's no joke. It's such an amazing time in the United States, and I kid you not, with the Supreme Court ruling that came down last week, it's just so awesome that I think America's headed in the right direction. We talked to two experts on this episode of The Crude Truth.
In 1901, at Spindletop Hill near Beaumont, the future of Texas changed dramatically as, like a fountain of fortune, thousands of barrels of oil burst from the earth towards the sky. Soon, Detroit would be cranking out Model Ts by the millions, and America was on the move, thanks to the black gold being produced in Texas. Now, more than a century later, the vehicles are different, but nothing else has truly changed. Sure, there may be many other alternative energy sources like wind and solar and electric. But let's be honest, America depends on oil and entrepreneurs. And if the USA is truly going to be independent, it has to know the crude truth.
This episode is brought to you by LFS Chemistry. We are committed to being good stewards of the environment. We are providing the tools so you can be too. NAPE Expo, where deals happen. Air Compressor Solutions. When everything is on the line, Air Compressor Solutions is the dependable choice to keep commercial business powered up. Sandstone Group. Exec Crew. Elevate your network, elevate your knowledge. Texas Star Alliance. Pecos Country Operating. Fueling our future.
Okay. Well, hello, and thank you again, as always, for tuning in to another episode of The Crude Truth. I'm just so excited today. As you can see, I have on two nationally recognized names and their faces on this Zoom special edition of The Crude Truth. As I kind of mentioned in our teaser, kind of just mentioned the Supreme Court and some of the rulings that have come down, and the one that's just been really exciting and I think motivating should be for at least half America was the Chevron deference that came down last Friday or so, I think maybe 2 Fridays ago from this coming Friday. And today I've got on just two experts that know that inside and out. And, you know, as an oil and gas operator, I'm very excited about it. So today I've brought back on actually one of my co-hosts of 3 podcasters and one of the best article writers there is out there, David Blackmon. David, how are you?
I'm great, and thank you for not calling me a journalist. I really appreciate it.
You caught me. You're welcome. And also is another returning guest to The Crude Truth. Wasn't able to get her out here, unfortunately, on the Crude Truth private jet quickly enough. But coming from Wyoming, the one, the only Professor Sarah Falen. Sarah, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's okay. Next time I'll catch the jet.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And I know it was kind of a whirlwind to get you on. I was like, hey, can you get on this day? And you were branding cattle, by the way. And how fun was that the last week before July 4th?
That's, it makes it a really busy time of year. We do typically brand on our ranch north of Cheyenne, Wyoming. We typically brand right around the 4th. And so that's just sort of a yearly thing for us. But it's always a lot of fun, lots of roping, and it's a big community event. Always a good time.
Okay, so it is. I was going to ask you, because obviously a lot of us watch that Yellowstone show and they make it into a big deal on the show. So I was going to ask you, is it a pretty big deal? Because you see in the show, the community comes together and everybody comes in like that.
Yeah, I would say, okay, so if I had $1 for every time somebody asked me if my life was just like Yellowstone, the show, I could just retire. But at least at our place, it is kind of like that around where I live. We still do the big roping and dragging, and all the neighbors come to help. And so we take turns and we go help the neighbors. There's quite a few ranches who don't do it like that anymore, but ours still does.
That's awesome. That is just too awesome. Well, the reason I wanted to get you on is, one, you've got a law degree, you're teaching students, and you're practicing everything that you're preaching in the real world still today, as we kind of talked about in the past. And I wanted to jump on today and talk to you both about that Chevron deference that came down. And Sarah, real quick, for everybody out there that may not know who you are, can you just give them a quick 30-second elevator pitch about who you are and why I think you're one of the best out there?
Sure. I guess I don't know why you think I'm the best, but my background, I'm a 6th generation Wyoming ranch kid. Both of my parents are actually attorneys, and they specifically represent farmers and ranchers. I wanted to follow in their footsteps. I got my law degree here a few years ago, and then rather than practicing traditionally, I really work at trying to educate the public about laws that impact specifically agriculture, but also other natural resources. So oil, gas, renewables, water, things like that. And now I teach agriculture law at the University of Wyoming.
And you know, that's what I meant by you practice. Like you're fighting, you're writing stuff for, if I'm correct, for Washington D.C. I mean, you've been there testifying, if I'm correct, at some places. And so that's what I meant by you are practicing what you've gone and learned, and then you're sharing that knowledge. So thank you again so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Well, David, again, you know, I know it's been a hot topic, but let's dive into the Chevron deference, if you don't mind, sir.
Well, sure, Sarah. So the video you posted on LinkedIn about this was just terrific. And it's a real tutorial that I think, pretty much everyone can understand and gives a really great overview of what this decision means and what it doesn't mean. And one of the points you make in that video is about the separation of powers and why the reversal of the Chevron deference in the Loper-Bright decision really is not a violation of the separation of powers. And I think it's a great point to start, by asking you about that, to explain why the reversal of this doctrine that was put in place by the courts 40 years ago is not in any way truly a violation of separation of powers.
Sure. One of the things that I find myself explaining all the time is, most Americans do know that we have three branches of government, and that's a great start. But a lot of people don't actually know what jobs those individual three branches has. And that's what the separation of powers refers to, is the three separate jobs of our branches of government. So we have, for those listening, we have the executive branch, which is the president and his executive agencies. The executive agencies are, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, the Forest Service. Those are the main ones that I work with. And then you have Congress, which is the legislative branch. It's the Senate and the House. They are supposed to be writing the laws. The executive branch enforces the laws. And then you have the judicial branch. And that is the court system. And so that's all of the judges. That's really what, this decision has to do with both the executive branch and the judicial branch. And the judges are supposed to be interpreting the laws to make sure that the laws that Congress writes adheres and complies to the U.S. Constitution. And so that's what the three branches are supposed to do. And under Chevron, two of the branches got really blurred because in that decision, the court had decided back in 85 or 84 maybe, that agencies, the executive agencies, are the experts in the field, and people just want to assume that the government is never wrong. And in my experience, the government is wrong like all the time.
All the time, yes.
And so they are writing regulations to help with the enforcement of Congress's laws. But then in the court system, under the Chevron deference, you could not challenge the agencies because the judges were forced to give deference or preference to the agencies based on the regulations that they're writing. So rather than the courts being able to interpret the decision and decide if they are complying with the laws and the Constitution, they just had to side with the government just because they're the government, whether or not they were complying with law or not.
Right. Yeah. And that was, and of course, it's so interesting to me. I'm not a lawyer, by the way, obviously, but it's really interesting to me because this is reflective of a constant tension between the three branches of government. And when you look back at what was happening in 1984, when John Paul Stevens wrote that decision in that case involving Chevron, you had a situation where the Republicans were very concerned about judges legislating from the bench, right? And so the whole point of that decision in the court case was to rein in an out-of-control judiciary. And now here we are, 40 years later, the administrative state has grown exponentially, largely because it's been enabled to by the Chevron deference. And so now you have this concern about a bloated bureaucracy in the executive branch. Do we run the danger now that Chevron's been reversed 40 years from now, coming back again with an out of control judiciary, right? I mean, isn't that just reflective of the constant tension in the federal system?
I think so. And one of the things that I've been asked quite a bit and has been brought up is people, I say unelected federal bureaucrats have been writing these regulations are not the same as laws, but they do have the same force and effect of laws. And so every time a regulation is written, which all of these agencies, the people running them are appointed by the president at that time. And so when agencies write regulations, there are huge policy swings from the regulations that are written. And so you look at the policies between the Obama administration to the Trump administration to the Biden administration, that's obviously a huge difference. And so one of the things that people say is, well, judges are unelected federal bureaucrats too. So it's just one group of federal bureaucrats writing laws or another group of federal bureaucrats writing laws. And my response has been, yeah, but only one of those federal bureaucrats has permission from Article 3 of the US Constitution to be interpreting those laws. Right. And so it really, I think that all three branches of government have the ability to be very bloated and very, overstepping, in my opinion, what the Constitution tells them to do. I think that happens all the time, federal overreach. But I've seen firsthand a lot of problems that having these executive agencies overregulate, problems that are caused in all industries, definitely the agriculture industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to I'm going to ask y'all both the same question with a little bit different. And Sarah, since you brought up the agriculture, we're going to go there first with the Chevron deference. What are some of the things that I'm going to say that you're going to expect to see the difference and maybe things changing more for the positive? Because as you mentioned, it's like this Chevron deference gave preference to the actual agencies like the EPA and other groups, like you said, the Fish and Wildlife, which you would think 9 times out of 10 are there really just to conserve and be safe. It's like I've always said on my other shows is, hey, all these agencies did great things. They just, again, like y'all are all both saying, got bloated. So getting back to the question is, where do you see some positivity coming into this from the ranching and agricultural side over the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, absolutely. I think the very best example is the Endangered Species Act. And the Endangered Species Act is one of those laws that I know the oil and gas, the energy industries, agriculture, we all struggle with it. That is one of those laws that I think had really good intentions, but has absolutely been weaponized against the industries. And one of the places that I think this is such a good example is I work with a group called Perfect Balance. They're farmers and ranchers out in Oregon. And in Oregon, they have the Oregon spotted frog. And this spotted frog has been endangered for more than 10 years. And they just got a recovery plan written just in the last couple of years. It took more than a decade for them to get this recovery plan written. And the reason that the frog population is declining is because of a bigger, stronger frog species that is outcompeting the Oregon spotted frog. And it's eating the spotted frog's eggs. It's, taking up all the habitat. And so rather than recognizing that and then doing anything to control this bigger frog, what they have done is shut off the irrigation water to the farmers and ranchers in Oregon. And so you have these farmers and ranchers that are paying for their water. By the way, they're still paying the full amount, but they're only receiving 25% of the water that they're paying for.
Oh, wow.
And so you have all these farmers and ranchers going out of business. And where Chevron plays into this is we would be able to sue over this recovery plan that is not working, but for the fact that it is us against the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so the courts have to side with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And under this new decision, the Loper Wright decision, we have the ability, we're actually going to talk with those clients later today. We now have the ability and possibly a legal avenue where we could sue and have the court determine whether or not the agency is actually complying with what Congress intended them to do. Yeah. And so we think that examples like that is a really positive way to impact agriculture, because right now we just have to do whatever the agency says, whether it's right or wrong or violating law or violating Congress's intent specifically. And now we have the ability to challenge them and make some real differences. And for some of these people who are just trying to feed the world, feeding the world shouldn't be controversial, but apparently it is.
Apparently. Yeah.
Apparently.
Yeah.
And now, David, hopefully Sarah didn't take your thunder with the Endangered Species Act, but same question to you. With the Chevron deference, where do you see the oil and gas industry going here over the next 5 to 10 years with this new ruling?
Well, quite honestly, that was going to be my next question, about the ESA, because it is such a huge issue. I mean, Sarah, you have the sage grouse issue that's been plaguing your state for 25 years. We've got the dune sagebrush lizard down in Texas, in West Texas, in the middle of the Permian Basin. This lizard exists everywhere by the millions and millions. But the Fish and Wildlife decided to list them under the ESA as endangered due to the diminishing habitat interpretation. And of course, I'm sure Center for Biological Diversity and the other activist groups are pushing this frog listing in Oregon, just as they've done with the dune sagebrush lizard. And they have created this cottage industry, these 2 or 3 really radical left-wing activist groups, forcing Fish and Wildlife into these listings, under diminishing habitat. And so I think that, what the reversal of the Chevron deference does is create an opportunity, just like you said, Sarah, for companies or individuals with real standing who can prove they're being damaged by this interpretation of the ESA to at least challenge the agency's interpretation in court, and whether or not it's outside the intent and the language in the Endangered Species Act. And I think pretty clearly it is. I mean, if you just read the language in the Endangered Species Act, there's little question that listings like these are well outside of what Congress intended.
Yes.
So, but my other question for Sarah is, the next one I have on my long list is about Massachusetts v. EPA, the 2007 case that enabled EPA to regulate carbon dioxide, the foundational element in the atmosphere for all life on planet Earth, as a pollutant. And what you think is an opportunity, because I've been asked a lot, and it seems to me that there's a similar opportunity to challenge that case now for companies or people who can demonstrate they've been damaged by that decision. And I wonder if I'm just off base on that.
Well, I think it's, with any of the big cases that have been decided with Chevron as its deciding basis, one of the things, it's going to very greatly depend on the situation and the facts that you have and the damages that you can prove. Because I think one of the big confusions about Chevron is number one, people think that all of the regulations that were decided with Chevron as the deciding basis are just going to go away. And that's not true. That's not how law works. You can't just retroactively apply law like this. And then the second thing is not everybody can challenge for anything. You still have to meet standing requirements. You still have to meet, there's 2 kind of complex issues, issue preclusion and claim preclusion, which basically says that if there's already a decision that's about the same facts, you can't have the same parties with the same facts bringing the same case. And so you still have to jump through a lot of those legal loopholes. And so I think, in the example that you gave, it's absolutely possible to challenge, if you have the right facts and if you can prove the right damages and if you have standing in court. And a lot of people think that you can just sue for anything, and you really can't. You have to be able to meet these basic thresholds to be able to go to court. And so it's going to absolutely depend on the individual and what their specific situation is.
Yeah, and it's going to take years, right? I mean, for any of this to percolate up through the courts, and it's a point I've tried to make as strongly as I can, that any of this is going to take years, because you have to start at the district court and go up through the Court of Appeals, eventually Supreme Court. And then a lot of it is also going to depend on how strongly the government, depending on who's president at the time, is willing to go to the mat to defend the government's position in the case. And, this election in November could have a big impact on the interest the government has in defending some of these regulations. So it just seems to me that we're in a very uncertain time with all this.
It's certainly going to take a lot of work. I think one of the things that people are really misinformed about is I think that people understand Chevron being overturned so that saying that the government is automatically going to lose now.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. The judges are supposed to be looking at the laws, at the regulations, at the decisions, and then determining if they comply with law. And if the agency, if the court finds that the agency complied with law, then they're still going to side with the agency. All this does is put, the little guy on the same playing field. And a lot of people are concerned. You mentioned the government's interest in coming to the mat and how hard they want to fight for their decisions. A lot of people have said to me, well, now just big corporations are with a lot of money are going to be able to defend. And really what I think is the government has a lot more money and resources than most anybody else out there anyway. And the folks that I'm concerned with certainly don't have unlimited money and resources. And so I think that the government's ability to go to the mat and defend their decisions is a lot stronger than people think. And then you also have to look at this in different jurisdictions. So, for example, the Ninth Circuit Court is a federal district, is extremely liberal. And a lot of times they're going to side with the government anyway, because that's just typically what happens. And so you have to have the right facts. You have to be in the right jurisdiction. It's going to take years no matter what. And so people, the headlines, when you look up, Chevron deference being overruled, are actually really funny because they make it sound like the world is imminently ending and all of our water is going to be poisoned. And somebody commented, now they could put lead in Lunchables. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's, those kinds of changes they're not going to happen. You're not going to be able to put lead in any food. And they're certainly not happening overnight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I agree that, none of this is going to be overnight. And that's why I was like, hey, over the next 5 to 10 years, where do you see this going? But I also do agree that, hey, the playing fields are going to be leveled a little bit more, because that's always been one of my, I guess, standpoints. And David's heard me say this before, Sarah, is, if I go decide to drill in West Texas somewhere and all of a sudden the EPA comes out and goes, oh, you have an ant that is like the little insect that's endangered, that's going to stop me from drilling. I'm like, well, great. The EPA's come out. This is an endangered species. I'm done. Or they use the Endangered Species Act, whatever. But somebody like Chevron or Exxon, they're going to go hire 5 biologists and do their best to prove why that's not like that, at least. So, yes, I do agree that, over time, this does give us a little bit more of a playing field. Keeping it semi within the realm of politics, I kind of want to touch base, Sarah, and if you can explain what the 30 by 30 is, and no, that's not an ESPN show, correct?
No, it's not. And it has a couple of names. It's also called the America the Beautiful Initiative. And what that is a Biden executive order from, one of the many, many that he wrote in his first week in office. Actually, I think this one was maybe like within the first couple of days that he was in office. And that is the administration's goal to conserve 30% of our land and water in its natural state by the year 2030. And when they started that, the federal government was going to have to add an additional 440 million acres to what they already own. And a lot of people look at that and say, oh, conserving our land and water, 30%, that seems reasonable. But the reason that it's not reasonable is because it takes all of that land nearly completely out of production because of the requirement that the land has to be conserved in its natural state. And one of the requirements is that you can't have the main purpose of the land be economic production. And so that's going to kick off the majority of grazing. It's going to kick off the majority of oil and gas production, of any energy production, including renewables. Everybody thinks that renewables have no environmental impact, and that's not true. So no renewables. You can have recreation, but not if it's recreation that is like economic for a specific person. And so that is one of those lofty environmental goals that is, in my opinion, a land grab. And you guys down in Texas, you have a lot of private property. Out where I live, there's a lot of public lands already. And the uses are already fairly strict on what you can and can't do on those lands. And the public lands that already exist largely don't count towards this goal. And so it's taking up more private property to be able to achieve this goal, which puts states like Texas and really any of the Midwest, Eastern states more at risk.
And so what everyone needs to know about that 440, what'd you say, 440 million acres?
Million acres.
So that is 155% the size of the state of Texas. State of Texas is about 270 million acres. So
Whoa.
think about that, folks. This is an enormous land grab. I mean, it's just unimaginable almost. So it's a big deal. So let's go to stare decisis, because Justice Roberts, as you pointed out in your video on LinkedIn, went out of his way to make the point that all these regulations that have been put in place under Chevron deference, while it's been in effect, would still be subject to the legal doctrine of stare decisis. And I know Clarence Thomas, Gorsuch in his decision actually disputed a little bit of that in his concurring decision. But I wonder what your view is, because I look at that and I think, well, stare decisis was absolute. Roe v. Wade would still be the law of the land. And so it's not an absolute doctrine, but I wonder what your view is on just how flexible that might become.
I think it's really going to depend. So for those who don't know, stare decisis is a legal doctrine that basically says that courts have to give weight to issues decided before. And so in these decisions where, agency decisions have been upheld, Justice Roberts said, and I found the page and I keep quoting it to people because everyone keeps arguing with me saying that's not what the decision says. But on page 34 of Justice Roberts' decision, it says that previous agency decisions, including Chevron itself, are subject to stare decisis. So if those same issues are brought to court, it is possible that they are overturned. It is also possible that the courts say, because of the weight that we give to previous judges having upheld these agency decisions, that we're still going to uphold this decision. And so that's still, if you're looking at it as a scale, puts a little bit of weight on the agency's side. And so, if you I looked at the Supreme Court numbers, and it's something like 200 and something, I don't remember the exact number now, cases have ever been completely overturned in the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court takes up like 150 cases a year. And so that's a very, very small amount of cases that actually get overturned. I think that overturns on a smaller level, not every case is going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. And every issue that goes to the court is not going to be exactly the same. And so when you're overturning an issue, it's when the same issue is brought to court. And so a lot of the lawsuits that I think we're going to see, that's challenging agency decisions that were made under Chevron are going to be over slightly different issues. And so that's not technically going to be an overturn. It's going to be a new issue decided.
Yeah. So interesting. It's also complex and interesting to me.
Yeah, no, that's why I asked both of y'all to come on. I love how you said, I want to kind of go back to the beginning, Sarah, because you said, when the Supreme Court has seen things and it's weighted, what does that mean? Like, let me go back there. What does it mean to be a weighted issue?
So that just means that they look at, so the judges are not experts in any technical area of law. So the way that the court cases work is the agency is going to bring their experts, and whoever the opposing party is going to bring their experts, and the judges look at all of the evidence and then make a decision. And when I say that it's going to be weighted, I mean that if the same issue is brought in court, the judge is going to look at all of the evidence, and then another factor they're going to look at is what judges before them decided. And looking at that and basically saying, okay, well, previous judges thought that this was in accordance with law. Why did they think it was in accordance with law? Should I also be deciding in the same way?
Yeah.
And so it's just an additional factor that they look at among all of the other evidence presented to them during the court case.
I will say this, and the way that you've been able to read directly from the decision from Justice Roberts, and the way that you guys have explained it, the sky is not falling. From where I sit as an operator in the oil and gas industry, and we, as I've told you guys, many a time, I'm not an expert in many things, but you would think that the sky is falling to half the world with this decision. And the way, Sarah, you said it was, hey, the judges are going to sit there and they're going to go, this judge looked at it and thought this, why did they, should I? And then they're going to go make another decision. And it sounds like they're using a lot of common sense. And again, I'm not a Supreme Court justice expert, but I like to think that all 9 of those Supreme Court justices do that at this time. And I mean that all 9 of them sit there and they do this, kind of bringing in politics into it. Not every single decision that has been either not overturned or overturned, not all the newest justices agreed with what the former president probably thought as well. So I do think there is still a lot of independence. And I'm glad also how at the top of the show, we talked about how this ruling helps continue to separate the 3 branches of government. And Sarah, thank you for even describing those again, because I don't know what they're teaching anymore in school. And, there's been so much overstep with the executive branch to where just in the last 20 years, or 15 years, 20 years, executive decisions have really run rampant through every administration. And again, like you were saying, what happens with this next election is going to also show where we go over the next few years, whether it's in ranching and agriculture or oil and gas, and trying to get some of these former rulings overturned. So again, Sarah, and David, thank y'all just both so much for everything that y'all been able to share today. Ooh, it's a lot.
I think that one of the things that people don't understand when they are acting like the sky is falling, over this decision is that, a lot of those people who think that right now the administration is in their favor, and so all of the agency officials have been, most of them anyway, have been appointed by the Biden administration. And, and they say the agencies are the experts, the agencies are the experts. Well, the agencies were appointed by the president. So, he's going to appoint people not who are necessarily just experts in their field, but, people who are experienced in the field and also tend to agree with the president. Yes. And so what happens when the next president, whoever it is, maybe it's this election, maybe it's the next election, but when it's an administration that you disagree with, are you going to feel the same way that, for example, if Trump is elected, are you going to feel the same way that the agencies that he appoints, the officials for the agencies, do you still feel like they are the experts? Or do you have, political differences and think that now they are less qualified because they are going to tend to agree with President Trump? And so I think that is one of the things that makes this better, where the judges are interpreting the laws because they don't switch all the time like the agencies do. And just because you favor the agencies right now does not mean in the next 4 years you're still going to favor them, because they change so quickly.
What it all boils down to is it's very important for our 3 branches of government to all assert their constitutional duties and authorities the way they're supposed to be asserted, and not just willy-nilly sacrifice them to another branch of government. And unfortunately, what has really enabled, another factor that's really enabled the administrative state to grow to such a bloated level, is because Congress essentially gave up its oversight powers when it stopped doing budget bills 20 years ago and started funding the government on these continuing resolutions. So, Congress's main authority in oversight is controlling the budgets of these agencies. And when you just roll it all into a continuing resolution that has an automatic inflation factor in it every year, you've lost that authority. So another positive thing, I think it's really another positive thing that the current Republican majority in the House is really making a concerted effort this year to pass all 12 budget authorization bills as a separate thing rather than a CR. So we'll see how that goes.
I agree. I think that the other thing that Congress has done is they tend to write laws, as my mom would say, so that you can drive a Mack truck straight.
Yes.
They are extremely broad. And then in those laws, that's where they give specific agencies the authority to make regulations regarding a certain law. And so when they write these laws so broad and they just kind of throw everything in there now, you see, provisions all the time that are hidden in a specific law and it doesn't even make sense to be there. But they write the provisions so broad that it gives the agency that they've given authority to write regulations almost unfettered power, because they get to interpret. Well, they're not supposed to be interpreting, right? That's the court's job, but they get to write regulations to help clarify Congress's laws at such a great amount.
Wow, I liked that. I like that metaphor there that your mom uses, and it makes total sense. I mean, you just shared some, dare I say, the crude truth on why these laws are so broad and how these different agencies then interpret those and create the regulations within that law. That's scary and genius all at the same time. You lawyers are slick, Sarah. You lawyers are slick.
Hey,
That's
one
why
last point.
I always say that everybody hates lawyers, and I'm allowed to say that because I have a law degree. But it's because they're sneaky.
Yeah. One last point on that particular topic is the good news about all this is when you go and actually read the Endangered Species Act, which was written in 69 or 73.
Yep.
It's not like that. The Endangered Species Act is pretty clear and specific about what it's authorizing these agencies to do. And so, it's not like the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed in 2022. So there's a lot of opportunity there where the ESA is concerned, I think.
I think so too. And that's one of the things about, this current Supreme Court. We saw it with the Waters of the U.S. decision that, came out recently several months ago, where I think that the Supreme Court realizes that the agencies have had, so much power, and they're saying, agencies, your job is not to write law. It is to help enforce the law. And I think that they're really, honestly, I think I said in a video one time, they're taking a machete to Congress and saying, this is your job. You need to be writing the laws. You need to be putting your intent. It is not the agency's job to write the laws. And unfortunately, in the last several decades, that's what the agencies have started doing.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, David, I want to give you the opportunity, please, to go ahead and ask Sarah one more question if you would like to, sir.
Man, I'm pretty much exhausted on the questions. These are the questions that were top of my mind. And what I would like to do is really thank Sarah for taking the time with us today, because I've learned so much in this half hour or so that we've been talking. And it's really going to help me be a little smarter on all this in the future. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very passionate about, specifically, agriculture and then constitutional law.
Yes.
And so I love digging into these decisions and talking about the implications and I've been carrying a U.S. Constitution on my person since I was 12. And so I think everybody knew what I was going to do with my life from a very young age. And so I'm just excited when things go in our favor, which is starting to happen more often under this Supreme Court, but hadn't happened in a long time. So it's an exciting time for me to be really still at the beginning of my career.
Sarah, you mentioned there that last the Water Act. It seems like you are paying attention to a lot of these court cases as they come down. And I just want to say that from my outside looking in to anybody out there that's looking to work with you. That is awesome. The amount of knowledge that you're able to decipher and go through and you're looking for. So I think that's awesome.
Well, I think that that's why you have to make a career out of looking through that information, because I try really hard to tell people to be educated and do their own research, but I spend a lot of hours every day reading court cases in the Federal Register, which is where all the regulations are published, and most people have to do things like feed the world and produce oil and keep us in Wyoming, keep our homes heated and stuff like that. So yeah. I'm happy to do it because it's very time consuming and we need people doing other more important things. So
I think both of you guys are doing very important things. David continues to fight for the oil and gas industry on a daily basis. David, for everybody out there, where can they find your readings? Because you're on Forbes, you're on the Daily Caller. What else? Where else are you these days?
Well, it's really simple with me. You can find everything I do at my Substack, which is blackmon.substack.com, and just go there and it's all there.
But what I wanted to say was, again, that you are fighting for the oil and gas industry on a daily, and then to have Sarah on today, who you are just so versed in the world of what is a good regulation and what's not. And then so for you to be able to go from agriculture to oil and gas, like that is awesome. But you're fighting for the farmers and the ranchers. And who would have ever thought, like you have said many times, that we got to have people to fight for us to have food every day on the table. So I just cannot thank you enough for what you're doing out there, Sarah.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And And, I always tell people I could talk about these issues a lot longer than anybody wants to listen. So I appreciate it when somebody comes in and says, we've got 30 minutes, let's discuss a topic. And, just it keeps sharing the information, because I think it's so important for everybody to know kind of what's going on.
It is. And how can people get in contact and follow you and learn more about things from you?
I'm on all the big social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn, just under my name, Sarah Falen. Last name is spelled Falen, and can reach out to me there. I work part-time for my folks' law firm doing, research and education and outreach and stuff like that. So they can also find me at their law firm. Contact budfalen.com.
I love it. Well, guys, again, just thank you all both so much. And to all our listeners out there, hopefully today we got a little bit more education on the Chevron deference and how important it is to truly have that separation of powers. And like Sarah said, and even like I said at the beginning, there's some exciting things happening in America. This is the greatest place on the planet. And just because today may be a little rough doesn't mean tomorrow is going to be also. So just thank you all so much. And we'll see you again on another episode of The Crude Truth.
Again, The Crude Truth would like to thank today's sponsors: LFS Chemistry, NAPE Expo, Air Compressor Solutions, Sandstone Group, Exec Crew, Texas Star Alliance, Pecos Country Operating, and Real News Communication Network.
The easiest way to start your own podcast and TV show? Real News Communications Network. Stand out from your competition. Produce streams of high-quality social media content. Become a thought leader in your industry. With RNCN, you get to be the host. We handle everything else. Tour one of our 3 locations in Dallas, Fort Worth, and the Colony. Call 972-402-6333 or visit launchashow.com to find out more.